Hey, Snowden Baptist Church. My name is Brian Pate. I'm a missionary in Brazil, and I'm excited to bring a second lesson today on what it means to abide in Christ. And once again, I just want to thank you for what a special church you are. I'm thankful for my friendship with Pastor Brent, and I'm really thankful that you get to benefit from the ministry of him and his family. And man, I look forward to when I get to be with you again. Y'all have a special place in my heart. And today, I want to talk a little bit more about what it practically means to abide in Christ. And I think here we have three clues of what it means to abide in Christ. Because we know, in John 15:8, he says, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. So we know that we need to be fruitful Christians. We know that God is glorified when we bear fruit, but we feel weak. We know we can't bear fruit on our own. We, like the people of Israel, we really end up becoming wild vines. And so Jesus comes and he saves the day. Jesus comes and he becomes the true vine. He bears fruit through us. And so now we need to know what it means to abide in Christ. How do we abide in Christ in a way that he can produce fruit through us to the glory of the Father? And so I think there are three clues here. And the first clue is found in the relationship between the vine and the branches. Because he says in verse 4, "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." The first clue is we need to have this kind of a dependent relationship. When I grew up, we had grapevines on my parents' property. And every year we'd go out and we would trim them. We'd prune them. But we would trim them, and initially we would just let the branches lie there on the ground before we came and cleaned them up. But it would have been crazy if we had just left the branches there on the ground and thought that somehow those branches were going to produce fruit by themselves. We come out a week later and we check on the branches on the ground. Does it have any fruit yet? No, of course not. Because it's been separated from the vine. It's been cut off from the vine. And in the same way, we cannot expect to produce any fruit to the glory of the Father on our own. We cannot produce fruit by ourselves. We have to depend on Jesus for that. We have to abide in Jesus for that. So I think what we need to do is cultivate a dependent relationship with Christ. We depend on him because he's the one who sustains us. In the Christian life, I think sometimes we feel weary, worn out. We maybe worry that we're not going to make it to the finish line in one piece. And he sustains us. He holds us fast. He will keep us to the end. It's the vine's job to hold up the branches. And Jesus sustains us, and we depend on him for that. It's also the vine's job to nourish the branches. And in the dry times of our life, when we feel like we're in the valleys, Jesus will nourish us. And it's the vine's job to produce fruit through the vine. And so we depend on him for fruit. I don't think that we need to be sitting here thinking, I need to be more joyful. I need to be more patient. No, I think, if anything, we should focus on our relationship with Christ. And through that, he will produce fruit, and we will become more joyful and more patient because of our relationship with him. And so we need to have this dependent relationship. We cultivate, clue number one is, based on the relationship between the vine and the branches, we cultivate a dependent relationship on Jesus. Clue number two, I think, is found in the relationship between Jesus and his Father. And we see this in chapter 14, verse 10. He says, "Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. So here it's letting us know that they also have an abiding relationship. And because Jesus is abiding in the Father is producing his works through him, just like we abide in Jesus and he produces his fruit through us. So what does this relationship look like? John 14:31 tells us, "But I do as the Father has commanded me." It was an obedient relationship. Jesus obeyed the Father. And in the same way, I think we need to be cultivating an obedient relationship with Jesus. I think clue 2 is, yes, it's a dependent relationship, but it's also an obedient relationship. We do what he says. Now, how do we know what he says? Well, that leads us to clue 3. Verse 7, John 15, verse 7. "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you." So we know that it is a word-filled relationship. We obey him because we're spending time in the Word. Every day, we have this onslaught of the words of the world, whether it's from social media or the news or movies or friends or articles or late-night comedians. We hear the words of the world all the time. And we need to counterattack that by spending lots of time in the Word with Jesus. I think this is a little bit of what it means to abide in Christ. We cultivate a dependent relationship. We saw this in the relationship of the vine and the branches. We cultivate an obedient relationship. We saw this in the relationship of the Father and the Son. And we cultivate a word-filled relationship. So I want to encourage you. Abide in Christ. Spend much time in the Word with Jesus. This is how weak Christians like you and me can, I'm going to read verse 8 again. We can, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. We can be fruitful Christians to the glory of the Father when we abide in Christ.